In the race for the U.S. Senate, Governor Charlie Crist rakes in another $2.4 million, while Marco Rubio hauls in $1 million. Will this be enough to make a difference? And charges against former Speaker Ray Sansom have been significantly reduced. Does this mean he's off the hook? All that and more on this edition of Power Play with our guest, Shannon Kolvecchio with the St. Pete Times, Mike Vasalinda, Bureau Chief of Capitol News Service. With that, let's get started. Let's talk about the U.S. Senate race. I mean, we're talking about a lot of money.
A lot of money. To me, one of the more interesting developments this week was when Rubio released his numbers. And, you know, close to $1 million, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you compare it to where he started out last quarter, it's a huge jump.
It makes him real.
Yeah, and he would suggest there's momentum building.
Does it change the tone of the race?
Yeah, I think so. I think the governor's got to take a look at this because you've got some really conservative groups saying, he looks real now, maybe we'll jump in, we've got lots of money. He could have a $2 million quarter this time.
That's right.
I mean, he's becoming like the media darling of the conservative groups.
Oh, right. He's been on the cover of these, you know, very conservative magazines, and they seem to just be sort of, you know, they adore him. I've heard it said that he's like the Republicans' version of Obama, you know, where it's like there's this sort of adoration of him. And I do think that, you know, it could lead to some important endorsements. Does Jeb weigh in if he thinks that Marco has a more viable shot? That would be interesting.
Would that change things?
Well, if Jeb did, absolutely. I mean, look what it had, the impact it had on the Thrasher race. You look at the polling in that race, and he made a difference in the Thrasher race if he had the backing of Jeb Bush. So I think that would, to the party base, yes, that would make a big difference. The governor's choice, the current governor's choice, will be to try and turn those moderates out.
So will Governor Crist have to do anything differently or raise more money?
Well, to me, the question with his money right now is how much of it is available for before the primary. Because his real issue is the primary. Because a lot of the independent voters that he's going to get cannot vote for him in the primary. So that, to me, is a real factor.
From what I understand, it's about 2/3 of that money. It's got about $4 million versus Rubio's $1 million. It's a pretty good advantage.
And then speaking of money, let's move over to the governor's race. I mean, once again, collectively, we're talking about a lot of money, but it looks like CFO Sink is basically bringing in those dollars.
Yeah, she seems to have had a good quarter. You know, she was sure to get that news out there before McCollum did, which she probably would only do that if she knew that hers was more than his, I would think.
Yeah, and I think McCollum has got to be spending, based on what he's saying, he's $1 million. I think that's collective. I think what he's going to spend is going to be, I raised money for the party, that's what was important, I'll come back next quarter.
But a respectable amount. I mean, we're looking at over $4 million,
absolutely.
And the party, you know, is better for it.
That's right.
But Sink pulls ahead here. Sink gains momentum here. It makes her much more, it makes McCollum much more possible to pick up a challenger, maybe Dockery, maybe somebody else.
Right. It's still months and months before the election, so
it is, but
you
know, perception is a big issue to me, and I just sort of wonder strategically whether it was smart for him, if he did this consciously, to focus on helping everybody else.
Moving along, let's talk about former Speaker Ray Sansom. You know, some of the charges were dropped. Is he off the hook, or is there more to come?
Well, certainly, you know, in the court system, he had a good week, I would say. But I don't think that his worries are over. He still has this House Select Committee to worry about. And to me, the huge issue is potential IRS troubles related to all those Amex.
Well, and there's still the state charge. I mean, let's face it. You know, people have been found not to have committed a crime, but they lied about their involvement in something and have gone to jail for perjury. You know, it's kind of like Al Capone went to jail for income tax evasion. I think the major worries for Ray Sansom are still out there with the IRS.
Judge Lewis basically said, you know, I don't think the resolution is here in the courts. I think this is political.
Right. I mean, you could argue, hey, that budget was out there. The legislature doesn't have to pass it, and the governor doesn't have to sign it.
And well, 72 hours.
Yeah. Well, my quote from the judge was, you know, just because it was wrong doesn't make it illegal. You know.
And they all voted on that budget. I mean, they have 3 days to review it. So
that's exactly right.
Moving along, let's move on to our Power Play of the week. Shannon, let's start with you.
I'm going to go with Marco Rubio's fundraising. It is still early, but I think it was a significant step for him in his race against the governor.
Mike?
Sansom Select Committee hires a real prosecutor, sending the message to everybody that they're not going to whitewash the Sansom case, that he may have embarrassed the House, and they're going to let people know that was the case.
With that, thank you, our viewers, for being with us. Thank you, Shannon and Mike. And for all your political news, please visit SafetyReview.com. We'll see you next week.